Something inside you has already started shifting before you even realized what day it was. And that is exactly why this moment feels different from anything you have experienced before. Because this is not just another date passing quietly. This is a threshold. A point where something intangible suddenly begins to take form in ways you can measure, touch, and eventually count. And if you have been paying attention to the subtle signals in your body, especially that tightness or pressure sitting in your throat like an unsent message waiting to break through, then you are already responding to the energetic change that most people will completely miss. Because while others move through this day on autopilot, repeating familiar routines and reinforcing old patterns, you are standing at the edge of a doorway that connects your inner voice to your outer reality in a way that directly impacts your financial world. And this is where everything begins to make sense when you step back and look at what led to this exact moment, because the turbulence of April 2026 was not meaningless confusion. It was a necessary dismantling, a kind of internal storm that forced you into discomfort, into overthinking, into situations where communication felt sharp, reactive, and unstable, and that was not a mistake or a personal failure. That was the influence of Mercury moving through Aries, a placement that accelerates thought but destabilizes direction, amplifies urgency, but fragments clarity. And under that influence, your mind may have felt like it was racing ahead of itself, jumping from idea to idea without grounding, creating tension in conversations, misalignment in decisions, and a constant sense that you were reacting rather than building. And even though it felt chaotic, even though it may have made you question your own stability, that entire phase was doing something very precise beneath the surface. It was burning away hesitation, exposing patterns of self-censorship, and forcing you to confront the ways you hold back your voice when it matters most. Because now, as Mercury shifts out of Aries and enters Taurus on May 2nd, 2026, the entire frequency changes, and you can feel it, not just mentally but physically. Because Taurus slows everything down, stabilizes the nervous system, and redirects scattered mental energy into something that can actually produce results, especially in the material world. And this is where the connection becomes undeniable, because Taurus governs money resources and physical value, while Mercury governs communication, negotiation, and exchange. And when these two forces combine, communication stops being abstract and starts becoming transactional, your words begin to carry substance, weight, and consequence in a way that directly links what you say to what you receive. And this is why the sensation in your throat matters so much, because it is not random discomfort. It is activation. Taurus rules the throat, the vocal system, the channel through which thoughts become sound. And Mercury governs the act of expressing those thoughts. So when Mercury enters Taurus, it is not just a mental shift, it is a physical alignment. Your body is literally preparing to use your voice as a tool for creation. And when you begin to understand this, you start to see that your voice is not just a method of communication, it is a mechanism of manifestation, a bridge between the internal world of ideas and the external world of tangible outcomes. Because every time you speak, you are converting thought into vibration. And that vibration moves through physical space, interacts with people, opportunities, and systems. And during this specific window from May 2nd to May 17th, that vibration carries amplified influence in the realm of money and value. But here is where most people will lose the opportunity without even realizing it. Because they will stay silent, they will keep their ideas contained, they will rely on thinking, planning, or internal processing, and none of that is enough under this transit. Because Taurus demands physical expression. It demands that intention be anchored in the material world, and your voice is the tool that does exactly that. So if you have been hesitating, if you have been holding back conversations, delaying decisions, or suppressing what you know you need to say, this is the moment where that pattern becomes impossible to maintain, because the energy is no longer supporting silence. It is pushing you toward articulation, toward clarity, toward speaking with purpose. And as this realization begins to settle in, you start to see that what comes next is not about understanding the theory, it is about applying it in a very specific way, because there are precise forms of expression that align perfectly with this energy. And once you recognize them, you begin to understand how words transform into measurable outcomes, which is exactly where the next phase begins to unfold. There is a reason this part might make you feel both curious and slightly uncomfortable at the same time, because what you are about to use is not just language, it is structure. It is precision. And it is the exact way this current energy expects you to participate in it. And if you ignore this step, you are essentially standing in front of an open door without ever choosing to walk through it. Because during the window from May 2nd to May 17th, there are 3 very specific verbal patterns that must be spoken out loud every single day, not thought, not written, but physically spoken. And each one is designed to activate a different layer within you. Your internal sense of value, your energetic positioning, and your ability to translate intention into measurable financial outcomes. And when these 3 layers are activated together, they do not just support each other, they amplify each other in a way that creates momentum. Most people never experience, so the first phrase begins with something deceptively simple but deeply confronting. I am worthy of a beautiful life. I receive with ease, I do not chase. I align, and what makes this powerful is not the surface, meaning it is what happens internally when you say it honestly. Because most people have been conditioned to accept something less than beauty, something less than fullness, something that feels safe but not expansive. And when you say the words beautiful life, you are not just describing a preference. You are making a decision to stop tolerating limitation. And that decision immediately interacts with the Taurus influence, which is governed by Venus, the force associated with quality pleasure, richness, and the physical experience of abundance. So when you claim that level of life, you are stepping into alignment with the very frequency that Taurus represents. And then you move into I receive with ease, which is where resistance usually appears, because you have likely been taught that effort must equal struggle, that value must be proven through exhaustion, and that receiving without strain is somehow undeserved. But Taurus does not function through chaos, or force, it functions through stability, patience, and natural cycles, like a field that produces when it is properly tended, not when it is attacked. And when you speak ease into your reality, you are retraining your system to stop associating money with depletion and start associating it with flow. And then the final part of that phrase shifts your entire orientation. I do not chase. I align, and this is where the psychological transformation becomes undeniable, because chasing implies distance. It implies that what you want exists somewhere outside of you and must be pursued. But alignment assumes proximity. It assumes that what you want is already available, and your role is to match it. And this is the exact transition from the Aries-driven urgency of April into the grounded magnetism of Taurus. And when you say this out loud with presence, with intention, your body begins to register a different reality. One where you are not reacting to opportunities, but attracting them. And that leads directly into the second phrase, which is intentionally direct. I deserve more money. And the simplicity of it is what makes it difficult. Because there is no hiding inside that statement, no abstraction, no spiritual bypassing it. Forces you to confront every belief you have ever internalized about money, about worth, about whether you are allowed to want more than what you currently have. And for many people, this is where discomfort rises, because there are layers of conditioning that associate desire with greed, expansion with selfishness, and financial ambition with moral compromise. But Taurus does not carry those distortions. Taurus recognizes money as a resource, as something that builds security, supports experience, and allows you to engage with life more fully. And when you say, "I deserve more money" out loud repeatedly, something begins to shift beneath your conscious awareness because your mind starts to reorganize itself around that belief. Your perception changes, your attention shifts, and opportunities that were previously invisible begin to stand out, not because they suddenly appeared, but because you are finally positioned to see them. And your behavior follows that shift. You speak differently in conversations. You respond differently to possibilities. You take actions that are aligned with expansion instead of hesitation. And this is where the third phrase becomes essential, because without it, your energy remains broad, and broad energy produces broad results. So the third phrase requires specificity. It requires you to define exactly what you are receiving, not in vague terms, but in precise, measurable language. And when you say something like, "I am currently receiving an additional amount of money this month," you are giving your mind a target, a structure it can organize around. And this is where many people underestimate the importance of detail, because the brain does not respond strongly to abstraction. It responds to clarity. And when you provide a specific number, a defined outcome, your entire system begins to orient toward making that real. And the key here is to speak it in the present tense, not as a future possibility, but as an active experience. Because when you frame it as something that is already happening, you reduce the psychological distance between where you are and where you intend to be. And if you add sensory elements, if you allow yourself to imagine the feeling of seeing that number, the experience of receiving it, the sense of stability or freedom it creates, then the process becomes even more powerful. Because now you're not just stating a goal, you're embodying a reality. And as these three phrases begin to integrate into your daily rhythm, you will start to notice subtle but undeniable changes, not just in your thoughts, but in your reactions, your decisions, and the way the external world begins to respond to you, which sets the stage for what comes next in this process. Before you dismiss this as just another repetition exercise, understand that the difference between someone who sees results in this window and someone who does not is not belief. It is embodiment, because when you speak these phrases, you cannot remain disconnected from the physical world. You have to anchor them into something real, something you can touch, something your body can register as present. So when you say them, you hold money in your hand. You feel the texture of your wallet. You sit in the exact place where you create or earn. And this is not symbolic. This is neurological. Because Taurus is an Earth frequency, and Earth does not respond to imagination alone. It responds to contact, to sensation, to proof. And when your senses are engaged, your mind stops treating your words as theory and starts processing them as reality in motion. And this is where the acceleration begins to separate people. Because while everyone is technically under the same transit, not everyone is positioned to use it at the same speed. And there are three specific archetypes that are aligned in a way that allows their words to convert into results almost immediately. And if you recognize yourself here, or if you carry strong placements in these signs, then what you do in this moment matters more than usual. Because the response time between expression and outcome is shortened dramatically, starting with Taurus, which stands at the center of this entire shift. Not just because it is your season, but because the mechanism of this transit is literally moving through your identity, activating the way you present yourself, the way you speak, the way you are perceived. And when Mercury, the force behind communication, negotiation, and exchange, enters your sign, it does not just influence your thinking, it transforms your presence. And if you look back at the past months, you can probably recognize a pattern of delays, miscommunications, unclear agreements, or situations where you knew your value, but could not fully articulate it in a way that translated into compensation, and that pattern ends the moment this shift occurs. because what felt foggy becomes defined. What felt uncertain becomes direct, and suddenly you find yourself saying exactly what needs to be said without overthinking. And more importantly, people respond not just with acknowledgement, but with tangible agreement, with payment, with opportunity. And this is why your role now is not to hesitate, not to wait for confirmation, but to step forward and express what you have been holding back, whether that is a request, a proposal, a boundary around your pricing, or the decision to move something from idea into action, because during this window, your voice carries weight in a way it has not before, and that influence extends into the experience of Leo, but in a very different direction. Because for Leo, this energy moves into the space of visibility, reputation, and professional standing, activating the arena where recognition turns into income. And what makes this moment significant is that the groundwork has already been laid. People have been observing, evaluating, forming impressions, and now the shift of Mercury into Taurus signals readiness on their side, readiness to make decisions, to assign roles, to offer opportunities that are not temporary, but structural, the kind that elevate your earning capacity over time. And this is why remaining silent would be the only real mistake, because the energy is not about being discovered passively. It is about stepping into the space and articulating your value clearly, using your voice to define what you bring, what you require, and what you are no longer willing to accept. And when you do that, the response is not random. It is aligned. You are placed in front of the exact individuals who have the authority and resources to match your level, and the speed of manifestation here is directly tied to that visibility. Once you claim your position, the external world reorganizes to meet it. And then there is Aries, where the story has been building differently. Because the intensity you have felt recently has been driven by Mars moving through your sign since early April, creating momentum, urgency, and a constant push to initiate, to act, to move forward without hesitation. But that energy on its own lacks structure. It creates movement, but not always sustainability. And this is where Mercury entering Taurus becomes essential, because it redirects that raw force into something that can produce consistent income, activating the area of personal resources earnings and the systems that support them. And what changes here is not your drive, it is your precision. You begin to see how to channel effort into strategy, how to turn ideas into offers, how to convert action into revenue, and the speed at which this happens comes from the combination of momentum and clarity. You have the willingness to move, and now you have the framework to move effectively, which is why the instruction here is not to stop, but to refine, to slow down, just enough to ensure that each step is intentional. Each statement is clear, and each decision is aligned with a specific outcome, because when you do that, the results follow quickly, often faster than you expect. And as all of this unfolds, there is another layer building simultaneously, something that intensifies the entire process, because this shift of Mercury into Taurus is not isolated. It is occurring alongside additional forces that amplify its effect. And one of the most immediate is the full moon in Scorpio taking place on May 1st, which is already rising as you move through this moment. And this energy is not about accumulation, it is about release, about clearing attachments, debts, emotional ties, and outdated structures that are no longer aligned with where you are going, because Scorpio governs shared resources, transformation, and the cycles of holding on and letting go. And as this full moon reaches its peak, it begins to strip away what cannot continue, creating space for the new financial pathways that this Mercury transit is activating. And as you start to feel that internal shift, you begin to realize that what is happening is not just an opportunity to gain, it is a requirement to let go in order to receive, which leads directly into the deeper layers of this process that are about to reveal themselves next. There is a quiet intensity building right now that most people will overlook. But if you slow down and feel into this moment, you will notice that something is being cleared before anything new is allowed to arrive. Because the full moon in Scorpio reaches its peak tonight, just hours before Mercury shifts into Taurus. And that timing is not accidental. It is precise, because full moons are not about beginning. They are about completion. They are about exposure, about revealing what has been hidden beneath the surface. And when that illumination happens in Scorpio, it goes straight into the deepest layers of your relationship with money, with security, with survival, with everything you have been carrying emotionally around: lack, debt, fear, and control. And this is where many people resist the process because it requires honesty. It requires you to look directly at your financial reality without avoidance, without denial, without softening the truth, and to acknowledge not only the numbers but the emotions attached to them. The tension, the anxiety, the beliefs that have been shaping your behavior for longer than you realize. And the reason this matters so much is because you cannot receive something new while you are still holding on to what is no longer aligned. You cannot pour fresh energy into a system that is already filled with stagnation. And this is why tonight is your opportunity to consciously release those patterns, to recognize them, to feel them fully, and then to let them go, not intellectually, but energetically. Because once that release happens, you create space. And that space is what allows the next phase to take root. And that next phase builds quickly as you move toward May 14th, when Mercury reaches its Cazimi in Taurus. And this is the moment where everything concentrates. Because a Cazimi occurs when a planet aligns at the exact heart of the Sun, within a degree so close that it is considered empowered, refined, and amplified to its highest expression. And when Mercury occupies that position, the planet of communication, negotiation, and exchange is essentially operating at peak capacity, and in Taurus, that peak capacity is directed toward material outcomes, toward money, toward value, toward tangible results. Which means that May 14th becomes the most potent day in this entire cycle for verbal manifestation. The day when what you say carries the greatest impact. The day when clarity, confidence, and conviction combine in a way that influences reality at a much higher level. And this is why any conversation that matters, any agreement, any declaration of value, any financial intention should be spoken on that day with complete presence. Because the alignment supports it fully. And then, just 2 days later on May 16th, the cycle shifts again. As the new moon in Taurus arrives, and new moons are not about release. They are about planting, about setting intentions that will grow over time, and what makes this particular new moon so powerful is its position within the sequence. Because by this point, you have already been speaking your intentions for 2 weeks. You have already adjusted your internal state. You have already begun to take action. And now the new moon provides the moment to anchor everything into the next phase, to define what you are building over the coming months, to write it down, to speak it once more, and then to trust that the process is already underway, even if you cannot yet see the visible results, because growth in an Earth cycle begins beneath the surface. And this is where many people make the critical mistake that interrupts everything. They begin with enthusiasm. They follow the process for a short time, and then they immediately look for proof that it is not working. They measure progress too early. They question the timing. They allow doubt to replace consistency. And in doing so, they disrupt the very process they are trying to activate, because Taurus does not respond to impatience. It responds to stability, to repetition, to grounded action over time. And if you constantly check for results, if you keep pulling your attention back into fear, into uncertainty, into the need for immediate validation, you are effectively removing your energy from the manifestation and redirecting it into resistance. And the analogy is simple but accurate. When you plant something in the ground, it does not appear the next day. And if you dig it up repeatedly to check its progress, you prevent it from growing at all. And this is exactly how this transit operates. Your role is to speak consistently from May 2nd to May 17th, to act where action is required, and then to allow the process to unfold without interference. Because what is being built is not always visible at first, but it is forming. It is organizing. It is aligning circumstances, people, and opportunities in ways you cannot yet track. And as you move through this period, you may not immediately see a change in your external reality. Your account balance may look the same. Your inbox may not yet reflect the shift. But internally and energetically, something has already changed. The field you are operating in is different. And Mercury, in Taurus, is amplifying your ability to influence that field through your voice, giving your words a level of impact that turns expression into creation. And as you continue to use the three phrases, as you remain aligned with the process, you begin to understand that your voice is no longer just a tool for communication. It becomes an asset, something that directly shapes the outcomes you experience. And once that realization fully lands, you are no longer approaching this as an experiment. You are stepping into it as a deliberate act of creation, which is exactly where the next phase of this transformation begins to unfold. If you have made it this far, then something inside you already recognizes that this moment is not random, because everything that has been building up to now is converging into a single window where your actions, your voice, and your willingness to participate will determine what actually changes in your reality. And the reason this phase carries so much weight is because it is not just one isolated influence, it is a sequence, a layering of forces that reinforce each other, starting with the full moon energy that clears, moving into the Mercury alignment that activates, and culminating in the new moon that anchors. And when you understand how these pieces fit together, you begin to see that this is not abstract. It is structured. It is a process that has been observed, refined, and practiced for generations within astrological systems that track the relationship between cycles in the sky and outcomes in the material world. And what that means for you is simple but demanding, because knowing is not enough. Understanding is not enough. Even believing is not enough. You have to engage. You have to use your voice deliberately, consistently, and without hesitation. Because when the planet that governs communication moves into the sign that governs value, resources, and money, and you consciously direct your speech toward abundance, you are aligning with a mechanism that connects intention to outcome in a very direct way. But the key is participation. The key is repetition. The key is speaking out loud every single day with clarity and conviction, not casually, not half-present, but fully engaged, because this window does not remain open indefinitely. It begins now and it closes on May 17th, giving you a defined period where the relationship between what you say and what you receive becomes unusually responsive. And this is where the internal questions start to surface, because at some level you are being asked to confront your own readiness, not in theory but in action. Are you actually willing to express your value without softening it? Are you willing to articulate what you want without apologizing for it? Are you willing to position yourself in alignment with receiving rather than chasing? And those questions are not rhetorical, they are practical, because your answers will show up in what you do over these days, in whether you speak or stay silent, in whether you maintain consistency or fall back into old patterns, and as you consider that you may notice resistance, hesitation, or doubt, trying to reassert itself, and that is part of the process as well. Because stepping into a different level of expression requires you to move beyond familiar limits. But this is exactly where the shift happens. When you choose to act despite that resistance, when you choose to speak even if it feels unfamiliar, and as you do, that you begin to experience a subtle but undeniable change in how you relate to your own voice. It becomes less about questioning and more about directing, less about reacting and more about creating. And that is when the external responses begin to align, not instantly in every case, but progressively, consistently, in ways that reflect the new position you are holding. And this is why this is not framed as a possibility, but as an invitation to step into a role. Because once you recognize that your words carry influence, the responsibility shifts to you to use them intentionally. And as this phase unfolds, you are not just observing what happens, you are participating in shaping it. And if you allow yourself to stay with the process through its full duration, to use the tools that have been outlined to remain steady even when results are not immediately visible, you will begin to gather your own evidence, your own experience of how this works in practice. And that is where the real transformation occurs, not in what is explained, but in what is lived, and as you move forward from here. The next step is not to overthink or analyze. It is to begin to apply, to speak, and to observe what changes when you do.